Prelude to Coude. The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. By E.W. Barnes. Digital voice narration. Chapter 1. The ship juddered as the Border Patrol shuttle docked. The patrol's systems overrode the Turum's command programs and main power deactivated. The members of the Empyrean Guard tensed. After a long and uneventful journey from the first system, from this moment on, there were many ways the mission could go wrong. "Are we ready?" Leader Ira asked in a hushed voice, going over her checklist in her head. Merlina, their Corvidae teammate, waved an obsidian wing at the cargo containers. "The mining equipment is ready, and we have rarities and delicacies to be discovered." Ira turned her attention to her second-in-command. "Zadok, what's your status?" "The forged ship registry is complete, as is my new captain's license, duly authorized and approved. All is official and in order." "What's the plan if they don't buy our cover?" Merlina asked. From the pilot's seat, Fulgar murmured into his auburn beard. "How about the airlock jettison plan?" He flashed a feral grin. "That's not the mission," Ira warned, holding Fulgar's gaze. "Shock only. And only as an absolute last resort." She narrowed her eyes in readiness as the airlock registered in the green. "Let's do this." The hatch opened with a hiss. An older woman and a young man entered. They were wearing conformable composite armor in an ancient design, reflecting the planet's history as one of the earliest settled after the Terran emigration. Their weapons, on the other hand, were the latest tech, sleek and deadly. "You have arrived at Serenissima Nuva," the woman said as their sharp eyes scanned the crew and the ship, hands never far from their weapons. "If you come in peace, we will welcome you." "Border protectors of Serenissima Nuva, we thank you for your welcome," Zadok said, stepping forward. He pushed his silver ponytail off his shoulder. "We are the crew of the Outer Union ship Turum, and we wish to visit your world in peace." The woman nodded, not looking at them. "Thank you for your courtesy, crew of the Turum," she replied as her eyes darted everywhere. "I am Officer Sirixa. You may confirm your cargo now." "We carry mining supplies," Zadok replied. "For delivery to the interior peaks." "Are you prepared for inspection?" "We are prepared, Officer Sirixa." "You're the captain." Officer Sirixa finally looked at Zadok. "Glissondian?" she asked with sudden interest, watching him closely. "Glissond is my home planet, yes." She glanced again at the rest of the team before shoving an interface screen at him. "Sign here." Zadok pressed his thumb onto the screen. Officer Sirixa reviewed it with a grunt and pointed to the containers, which Zadok opened for her one at a time. The young man stood alertly, scrutinizing the waiting team as his companion began her inspection, his hand casually resting on his weapon. His eyes paused at Ira. She smiled and tucked a wiry black braid behind her ear. He scanned her body in its form-fitting jumpsuit, and she assumed a sultry expression when his gaze returned to her face. He cleared his throat. "Have you been to Serenissima Nuva before?" he asked her. "Once or twice," Ira said, her voice husky. "If you've been here already, I guess you don't need a tour," he said in a disappointed tone. "I'm sure you could show me things I've never seen." His face colored. "How long have you been with the border protectors?" she continued. "I know I haven't seen you before. I'd remember you." "I'm new," he said, puffing out his chest. "There's been an increase in smuggling, black market items, and spies lately. Our world needs more protectors, and I volunteered." Ira shifted her stance enticingly. "Sounds dangerous," she breathed. He grinned as he stuck out his chin. "We serve Serenissima Nuva. If the Outer Union and Inner Coalition go to war again, we will protect our planet." "Jarvo." Officer Sirixa snapped. The young man, Jarvo, straightened, his eyes now on a point above their heads, cheeks blazing. Sirixa paused before bending over another container. "What's this?" Her voice oozed suspicion. "That is new mining technology," Zadok answered. "Quite revolutionary, actually. It looks like military tech." The design was based on Outer Forces equipment. It's a truly ingenious device. What's that underneath? Nothing, really. Syrixa glanced over her shoulder at Jarvo, greed in her expression. His back to her, he did not see her pocket the glowing topaz Merlina had planted for her to find. She radiated an air of satisfaction as she returned to the airlock. "You are invited to visit Serenissima Nuva," she announced. Jarvo pivoted and took his place next to her, and she accessed her interface screen. Main power returned, and then they were gone. The team breathed internal sighs of relief. Their cover was intact. They were ready for the next stage of their mission. "Did you hear what he said about going to war?" Fulgar asked after returning to the pilot seat, following the instructions radioed from the ground to maneuver the Turum into a holding pattern for landing near the equator of the planet. "I've been hearing stuff like that a lot lately," Zadok muttered as he returned the mining supplies back into their containers. "Do you suppose it means anything?" Merlina asked. Zadok shrugged. "I think it means people like drama and gossip," he answered. "You don't think a new war surge is coming?" Fulgar asked. Zadok looked thoughtful. "I trust our government officials to keep the peace," he answered in his usual tactful way. Merlina clicked her beak in irritation at this evasion, and even Ira frowned. "You disagree?" Zadok raised his brows at their leader. "I agree our government strives to avoid war," she said slowly. "But I also don't think that these rumors, or our being sent here, are a coincidence." "Do you believe war is coming?" Merlina asked. "I hope not." "Nice flirting, by the way," Fulgar said with a grin at Ira. "You're like those flowers you grow, beautiful but deadly." Their leader shrugged. "I took advantage of an obvious opportunity to get intelligence." Merlina ruffled her feathers in annoyance. The word intelligence is a generous description. "We've been cleared to enter the atmosphere," Zadok announced. Even from orbit, one could see that Serenissima Nuva was a superbly designed planet, with a pleasing mix of green growth and city clusters. Inhabited areas were connected by high-speed transport systems that worked with the landscapes and topography instead of having been forced through. Designed by the original inhabitants, it was a modern civilization that preserved the natural beauty of the planet. Even millennia later, their creative achievement flourished, making the planet famous for its beauty. Their course took them to the Metropolita Equatoria, a belt of cities stretched out across the center of the planet. The ME, as it was called, housed most of the spaceports, though there were smaller ports at each of the poles, and minimally equipped stations at equidistant points which served automated transports. All ships carrying sapient crews were required to land at designated sections based on the ultimate destination of the cargo and people aboard. For the crew of the Turum, delivering mining supplies required landing in the interior peak section, the closest to the Northern Hemisphere's only terrain extraction operations. There, they would deliver their cargo to a pre-selected seller and remain in the city a short time before returning to the first system. At least, that was the itinerary filed with the border protectors. In reality, the Empyrean Guard was there to complete a multi-part mission. Fulgar and Merlina were assigned to receive an intelligence drop from an Outer Union operative, and Ira and Zadok were to find and retrieve an Outer Forces deserter, dead or alive. Fulgar banked the Turum in a slow turn that allowed the team to take in the stunning ME skyline, with robust towers thick with food crops growing on roofs and terraces. Bright surfaces sparkled behind the greenery as the light of the system's twin suns hit the structures at just the right angles. It was a flight path most visitors took to enjoy the beauty of Serenissima Nuva. It also allowed the members of the Empyrean Guard to memorize the lay of the land. "Remember the operation parameters," Ira reminded her team as they neared the gleaming pylons of the spaceport. "The mission is cover-level Turnian, no heads-up displays, no internal comms, no camo sheaths. We're seats-free on this one," she said, referring to the brain implants given to all Outer Union citizens. She grinned at them. "We do this one the old-fashioned way." "My favorite kind of mission," Merlina croaked, her onyx eyes twinkling. "I don't see why we have to sneak around," Fulgar grumbled. "If they were loyal to the Outer Union, they would welcome what we do to keep them safe." Well, they don't, Ira said simply. The planetary government resents what they characterize as outer union interference, Zadok added, ever the diplomat. Their leaders listen to inter-coalition propaganda, you mean, Merlina said with a disgusted click of her beak. Whatever the reason, orders are orders, Ira said. Assume our frequencies and energy signatures will be monitored. The Turum came to an imperceptible halt as Fulgar gently set the ship in its designated berth. We've got half a day on the ground, no more, Ira said as they converged at the airlock. If you're not back in time, you're left behind, and the Outer Union denies all knowledge of you. Clear? Her team nodded, eager to disembark. Good. Let's go. Chapter 2. It took an interminably long time for their cargo of mining supplies to be processed and accepted by the dealer. He's putting on a good show for someone, Fulgar thought, as the bargaining went on. When the bulk of the negotiations were complete, Fulgar and Merlina gladly left Zadok and Ira to haggle over the last of the seller's tariffs not already accounted for in the merchandise agreement. While they waited, the dealer's cargo workers had told them about a bar with a Jua table within walking distance, and Merlina jumped at the chance to use her skills to earn some currency. That the bar was just a few doors down from the drop point was a bonus, and the detour would conveniently throw off anyone tracking their movements, which was a probability if the dealer's behavior was any indication. Covert watchers would see only an innocent round of gambling, followed by a solid meal at a local eating establishment. Nothing to suggest all was not perfectly ordinary and innocent. Fulgar and Merlina made their way to the bar through a fast-moving crowd of mostly Homo sapiens, with a few clusters of corvids sprinkled in the mix. None stood out as much as Merlina, though, as she cackled and rattled in excitement, her ebony eyes bright and alert to every movement. Fulgar wondered about the lowered beaks and tucked heads, and the occasional clicks of disapproval directed at Merlina from the corvids they passed. He glanced at the dark feathered head at his side, bobbing just above his elbow. He was sure his companion noticed as well. Corvids observed behavior an order of magnitude more closely than humans, but she was too deep into her cover to break character and discuss it with him. She would save dissecting every micro-expression she noted for the return trip to the first system, he had no doubt. The bar was lively for late morning. The players at the Jua table welcomed Merlina warmly, or at least welcomed the prospect of a new player with a full purse. After a few games, their enthusiasm waned. From a seat far enough away to see everyone in the game, but still close enough to assist if things got out of hand, Fulgar watched for telltale signs of building aggression as they realized a singularly skilled player had joined them. It would not be the first time Merlina's gambling skills irritated fellow competitors, driving some to irrational acts, but this time he saw only the steadily drooping faces of people slowly emptying their pockets. Eventually, all the players cashed out, and they left Merlina alone at the table, making smug rattling noises in the back of her throat as she squirreled away her winnings. "Are you ready to eat?" Fulgar asked as Merlina waddled over to where he sat. "Indeed I am," she answered. "Challenging play always gives me an appetite." It looked like a good game. "They were far superior players than I expected, worthy of the Navi Elysia," she added, naming a floating casino on the planet Acor, which was her favorite professional gambling venue. "I should like to come here again sometime." Fulgar chuckled. Merlina judged worlds based on the quality of the gaming, as opposed to natural wonders, artistic beauty, or architectural splendor. Though on the Navi Elysia, one could find them all. Merlina loved it, though it was one of the highest-priced vacation destinations in the Outer Union. After gifting a percentage of her winnings to the bar owner, the champion should always compensate the host, Merlina always said. They left. It was early afternoon, and there were fewer people on the street now. Fulgar came alert. Something about the way the pedestrians moved quickly, almost furtively, raised hairs on the back of Fulgar's neck. There was nothing in the mission brief for the planet to suggest nervous behavior in its inhabitants, no increases in criminal activity, government crackdowns, or economic hardships. But what his instincts were telling him was undeniable. They arrived at the restaurant where the drop would take place. "This looks like a good establishment," he said, using a code phrase to communicate his uneasiness. Merlina looked up at him, dipping her obsidian beak once to let him know she understood. "Quite propitious," she said, using one of her fancy words to convey that she too was on alert. They took a seat at a table in a corner where they could watch the entrance. A barmaid appeared almost as soon as they sat down. "Welcome to the fair and eatery," she said, as she wiped the table with a towel. "How's the traffic out there?" she asked. It was the code phrase for the intelligence drop. Fulgar's unease grew. That the operative made contact as soon as they arrived confirmed his suspicions that something was not right on Serenissima Nuva. "Tolerable," Merlina answered with the confirming code word. "Though I hear tomorrow will be worse. Thankfully, we're only here for the day." The barmaid nodded. "What can I get you?" After ordering ales for both of them, Fulgar requested the local seafood entree. "Predictable," Merlina croaked, her feathers rustling with mirth as she ordered a legume puree. "I like what I like," Fulgar growled. His uneasy feeling had not dissipated, and he was not in the mood for teasing. They ate their meal with surprisingly little conversation. Merlina respected his sense of urgency, it seemed. They each ordered another ale and readied themselves for the drop. It was almost time. A man got up from the bar and walked toward their table, not quite in a straight line. The man sitting next to him followed him, his body language almost shouting his reluctance. "Buddy, how much for your bird?" The first man's breath smelled of cheap ale, which was marginally better than the ripe scent of body odor rising from his companion. "I'm not for sale," Merlina replied. Her voice was mild, but the feathers on the back of her neck rose. She shifted position, readying for combat. Fulgar knew Merlina could take down these drunken fools with one wing tied behind her back, but a corvid fighting in a pub would attract unwanted attention. "You heard her, gentlemen," Fulgar said cheerily, raising his glass in what looked like a salute, but was really an invitation to push off. Body odor grabbed his friend's arm. "Come on, let's go." "I want the bird," Alebreath insisted. His friend tugged harder until Alebreath dropped his eyes. "Yeah, all right," he gave in. Merlina made a noise that sounded like chirk. Fulgar had heard her say it before, and his seat's implant told him the word was untranslatable. He always suspected it was an insult. Unfortunately, a moment later, Alebreath came to the same conclusion. "What was that?" He turned back toward them, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "What did the bird say?" "She cleared her throat," Fulgar said, keeping his face neutral. Alebreath stared at Merlina threateningly. She returned his glare with unblinking onyx eyes. The ultimate poker face, Fulgar called it. Alebreath's expression went from angry to confused to a little frightened as he looked away. "Yeah, whatever," he said as body odor pulled him toward the bar. "We're supposed to be keeping a low profile," Fulgar murmured when they were out of earshot. "Not provoking a fight with the local drunkards." "What fun is there in that?" Merlina replied, dipping her beak into her drink. She knocked the glass over, sending liquid spilling across the table. Fulgar signaled the barmaid, who hurried over with towels. "More?" "No, we're good for now," Fulgar answered as he surreptitiously tucked the top towel into his jacket pocket. He stood. "Thank you for your service." Serenissima Nuva's largest sun was setting as they left the eatery, sending streaks of pinks and purples across the sky. The smaller sun drew violet shadows across the few pedestrians hurrying by, giving their faces an unhealthy tinge. They had only taken a few steps when Merlina, who liked to take the lead, stopped next to a wall, ducking her head under her wing as if she were preening. "Do you see them?" Her feathers muffled the question. He casually looked around, as if bored. A man and a woman watched them closely. "Sapient mercenaries?" he asked without moving his lips. "Do you think they're after you?" "Assume they are." This changed things. Mercenaries were paid to hunt sapients, fleeing the inner coalition seeking asylum in the Outer Union, and the fact that Merlina was an Outer Union citizen would not matter to them. Their planned route back to the ship was intended to maintain the appearance that they were tourists enjoying what the city offered. The itinerary included a stop at a sweet shop that Merlina had specifically requested, and since it was only a short distance away, Fulgar decided now was the time to fulfill her wish. He led the way, not looking back to see if the man and woman were following, though he was sure he could hear gritty footsteps keeping pace with their own. They neared the shop, and its bright illumination and sweet scents drew them towards it like moths to flame. The now audible footsteps behind them sped up. The mercenaries were trying to get to them before they reached the shop, he guessed. Fulgar was glad when they arrived. The store's front wall was fully open to accommodate as many shoppers as possible. He drew Merlina in, pressing themselves to the side, appearing to be deeply interested in a syrup-soaked fungi confection that was popular on the planet. Merlina's head bobbed back and forth, as if trying to take in all the offerings. "They have passed by," she rasped as quietly as she could, which was not very quiet. Fortunately, the shop was bustling, loud with the sounds of excited consumers and clerks, and noisy enough to drown out her words. Mission parameters required that they confirm the towel taken from the Farron Eatery contained the intelligence report they were there to collect. Fulgar's original plan had been to use a convenient alley or other empty location to make the confirmation, but the mercenaries had scuttled that plan. He decided the distraction of the busy shop would serve almost as well. "Come on," he said to Merlina. "Let's see if they have any kelp bits." Merlina clicked her beak in disgust. Seafood and sugar should not be mixed, she would say, but waddled along behind him without complaint to where display racks hid them from the rest of the patrons. He pulled the towel from his pocket and confirmed the data strand was there. Feeling his body relax, he almost exhaled in relief. He did not realize that he had been worried about the drop until that moment. He had been on edge since they had arrived on the planet, he realized. Even though Serenissima Nuva was in outer Union space, it had strong ties to the inner coalition, and suddenly he saw the strange behavior of the Corvids, the drunks in the bar, and the suspected mercenaries in a new light. He extracted the data strand from the towel and coiled it in a secure interior pocket of his jumpsuit. He tucked the towel in an outer pocket until he could convert it into its biological components to fertilize the next available tree. "We need to get back to the ship," he growled. Stopping only to purchase honey-coated seeds for Merlina, they hurried out of the shop. Twilight had fallen, the planet's second sun offering only enough light that it was never truly dark, but it was not enough to chase away the deep shadows that now cut across their path. "See anyone?" Fulgar murmured to Merlina. "No one," she croaked. Fulgar's instincts did not agree with her assessment. "We need to head for the alley door," he muttered. The alley door was a little used passageway from the merchant sector back to the spaceport. It opened into a maintenance corridor close to the Turam's berth, but most importantly, it was not marked on city maps and very few knew about it. It was only to be used in an emergency, but Fulgar judged it was worth the risk and was willing to take a tongue lashing from Ira if he was wrong. Fulgar and Merlina ducked into the shadowy gap between a clothing store and an appliance repair shop, at the end of which was the door. The alley was in complete darkness, not even the dim light of the second sun reached here. Fulgar pulled out a portable light bar but did not activate it, preferring to wait until they were in the maintenance corridor for the luxury of light. He crept forward until his outstretched hand connected with something solid. "We can go no further," Merlina said. "Too bad for you, huh?" a voice asked, startling them. It was male, coming from behind. "Looks like you took a wrong turn." Fulgar activated the light bar and raised it until it fully illuminated the alley. Men stood at the entrance, and it only took a moment for him to recognize ale breath and body odor from the eatery. Apparently, ale breath's desire for a Corvid companion was stronger than his common sense. As body odor crossed his arms and jut out his chin, ale breath widened his stance, as if he could block the way out of the alley with his body. "Give me the bird and you won't get hurt," he said. "But you will," Merlina cackled, stretching her wings in anticipation. "And I'm looking forward to it." Fulgar smiled, sharing her eagerness. Even odds. An entirely winnable fight with Merlina at his side. And it would be short. They would make it back to the Turam with time to spare. "You heard her," he said as he set the light bar on the ground. He strode toward the men blocking their way, the click of Merlina's talons loud on the walkway as she stalked alongside him. No deal. Alebreath huffed angrily. Fulgar was close enough now to smell a lot more ale on his breath than the last time. Quaffing liquid courage before hunting them, Fulgar thought. With no obvious communication between them, Fulgar and Merlina stopped just out of striking distance of Alebreath. It was time to offer them one last chance. Leave now or leave broken, Fulgar said. You think so? Alebreath replied with a sneer. Fulgar heard thumps behind them. The sound of feet hitting the ground. Many feet. Alebreath brought friends who had tracked them from rooftops, waiting until they could drop into the alley behind them and box them in. This would make things more interesting. Fulgar and Merlina pivoted at the same time until they were back to back, a maneuver they perfected during sparring practice. If that did not alert their attackers that they were facing well-trained fighters, nothing would. Now facing away from Alebreath and body odor, Fulgar counted 3 more men. 5-2 was more challenging, but not impossible. Fulgar felt Merlina shift her weight behind him. Last chance, she croaked in warning. They can't leave now, Fulgar laughed in reply. The party's just starting. Fulgar heard Alebreath's feet shift before he leapt at Merlina with a growl. The men Fulgar faced grabbed at his arms. They hoped to pin him down while Alebreath and body odor carried Merlina away. He jabbed one in the solar plexus. The telltale wheeze and doubling over told him it was a good hit. He elbowed the second one, hard enough for him to fall back into the third. So far, so good. A pained yell told him Merlina had gotten a hit on body odor, probably sliced an arm or leg with her talons. Fulgar could always feel when attackers went from fast and loose to focused and serious in a fight. It was more than a change in facial expressions. Stance, breathing, even their scent changed. These guys had hoped for a quick grab and run, but now they knew they were in it until the last man, or corvid, was standing. One lunged at him. This time Fulgar swung a fist hard, hitting him on the jaw. The man dropped to the ground, stunned. 4-2. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Merlina leap, slashing out at Alebreath. A red streak across his chest followed the course of her slice. The man howled in pain, staggering away from her before falling on his backside. 3-2. Fulgar could not bask in appreciation of his colleague's skill, however. His hand was yanked painfully behind him, and a burly and very hairy forearm wrapped around his neck. Get the bird. Hairy arm shouted in his ear. Fulgar craned his neck. Merlina was holding her own, but Alebreath was back on his feet and body odor was still standing. Merlina took a step, readying for a pirouette that Fulgar knew would leave both men bleeding profusely. But as she raised her wings, a snare dropped around her beak, then another secured her wings. A third whipped around her legs. She screeched in surprise as the loops tightened, knocking her off balance. A man and woman stepped into view. The ones Merlina had spotted earlier, the sapient mercenaries. Hey! That's my bird! Alebreath shouted in outrage. The woman cracked an electric lasso at his feet. Alebreath jumped back, stumbling over body odor. Without a word, the man heaved a squawking Merlina over his shoulder, and the mercenaries disappeared into the darkness. Fulgar's eyes darted to Alebreath. His stunned expression and ragged breathing told him this was not over yet. Only now it was 5-1. Chapter 3. Ira wondered if the length to which Zadok haggled with the dealer was entirely necessary for their cover, but it was pointless to interrupt him and ask. Eventually, they reached an agreement that left both unsatisfied, which probably meant it was as fair as it could be. Zadok's expression of frustration appeared so genuine, Ira nearly chuckled out loud. Knowing her second in command, it was likely a point of pride to negotiate the best deal he could, even if he was only playing a role. Come on, Captain, she said as she shouldered him away. Let's pick up those replacement parts we need. Like Fulgar and Merlina's visit to the eatery, Ira and Zadok's stop for parts was a necessary element of their cover. There were several people ahead of them when they arrived at the parts shop, and, after giving them a long once-over with his eyes, the proprietor kept them waiting until there was no one else left to serve, almost as if he did not want their business. Ira let her gaze wander as they waited, curiously watching the people ahead of them as they selected and paid for their purchases. There were no corvids, she saw, and the rest of the patrons wore the olive green single suits with flowing sleeves that were the fashion in the ME. With a start, Ira realized that she and Zadok were conspicuous in their dark gray jumpsuits. More than just as visitors to the planet, they stood out as people from the outer Union. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, she thought about what the border protector Jarvo said about going to war. Suddenly, it seemed like more than simply drama and gossip. When the shop emptied, and he could no longer avoid serving them without making his prejudices obvious, the proprietor acknowledged Ira and Zadok with hooded eyes. "What do you need?" he asked brusquely. "Vista rods, and one of those ferrolite transformers," Zadok said, pointing to a display on the wall next to him. "Can't help you with the Vista rods. I just sold the last one I had in stock." "How long will it take you to manufacture the transformer?" Ira could see the man's mind working, looking for a way to delay or deny their request. He pressed his lips together as he chewed the inside of his mouth. "I've got several orders ahead of you," he finally said. "I can't do it until after evening meal." "That will be fine," Ira said as Fulgar opened his mouth to protest. "You can deliver it to our ship, yes?" The owner reluctantly agreed. He rushed them through the transaction, and as they left the shop, Ira stole a look back to see the owner staring at them in resentment. She was glad they did not actually need the ferrolite transformer. She doubted he would deliver it in time, if at all. "That was strange," she muttered. "I agree," Zadok replied. "Who runs out of Vista rods?" "I was talking about his attitude," she said with a chuckle. "Maybe he was just having a bad day." "Maybe," she replied doubtfully. "Any sign of our man?" "Running the sweep now." Finding their quarry required accessing her cerebral translation communication and neurodata device, which Outer Union residents shortened to SEATs, to search for the frequency of the deserter's implant. Because they did not want their frequency to be detected, she had to run the scan in short bursts, microseconds at a time, and hope they got lucky. Fortunately, they knew from the latest reports that the man was hiding within the interior peak section, which narrowed things down considerably. That, and the deserter's psychological profile, which suggested he would dig in and hide, rather than staying on the move. "I think I got a hit," she said after a moment. "He's here. But I need a second ping to get a fix." "Which direction?" "I'm not sure," she murmured as she slowed to a stop. "I need to be stationary to get an accurate read. We need to find somewhere we won't stand out if we're not moving." Zadok focused on something over her head, and his face broke into a smile. "What about in there?" he said, jutting his chin behind her. She turned and chuckled. "An art gallery," she said with a laugh. "I should have guessed." She jogged to keep up with Zadok's long strides as he eagerly approached the shop. Like most of the stores in the sector, the front wall was wide open, but where others had merchandise on tables and pedestals for buyers to examine, this one's wares were floating above the ground, slowly rotating to offer a 360-degree view of the art pieces for sale. "This is exquisite," Zadok said, examining a sculpture. It looked like a blob of green and blue to Ira, but she did not have the eye for art that her companion did. She wandered into the shop, taking in the variety of styles and genres represented. She stopped in front of a three-dimensional painting of a flower she recognized, preparing to run the scan again while appearing to study it. "It's lovely, isn't it?" A woman beamed at her as Ira turned. "Yes, it's very nice. The work is by a local artist. The flower is native to our planet, you can find it in any green space, but see how the technique makes it look ethereal? Almost as if it was made of mist and clouds." "The artist is very talented," Ira agreed. The woman, who Ira assumed was the gallery owner, nodded significantly. "I discovered her," she said, puffing up with pride. "I find all the important ones." "Madam," a store clerk called out, and the woman turned. "If you'll excuse me," she said to Ira, before flouncing towards a well-dressed couple next to a gilded carving the shape of a small boulder. Ira turned back to the painting and ran the scan before the woman could return. The deserter's seat's frequency flared like a shooting star. They had him. Ira worked her way back to Zadok, who was discussing the artistic merits of the gold boulder with the well-dressed couple. He looked up as she approached. "Did you find anything you like?" "I think so," she nodded. "Let's take a walk and discuss it." He gave the couple a polite nod, and they left the shop. "Which direction?" he asked in a low voice. "To the west. There's a hostel in that vicinity, if memory serves." "Memory serves you well, my friend. Taking a room and hiding out would be consistent with his profile." "Then by all means, lead the way," Zadok said with a dramatic sweep of an arm. "Merchant lady." A hand grabbed her shoulder and turned her around. She planted herself, hands balling into fists. But Zadok had already caught the man, hauling him upwards with his long arms so that the man's feet barely touched the ground. Ira's eyes widened. It was the young border protector from the Turum. "Jarvo," Ira said in surprise. "That's your name, right? What are you doing here?" "My work period ended at midday," he said, his face coloring again as it had before. "I thought if you're not busy, I could take you on that tour." Ira caught a whiff of fermentation. It seemed he had imbibed more than needed to ask a girl on a date. She exchanged glances with Zadok, who raised his brows. His thoughts were clear. "We don't have time for this." "Thank you, Jarvo, but," she began. "Good," he said, giving Zadok an ineffectual shove, which resulted in him pushing away from the tall man, only to sway back. Jarvo kept his hand on Zadok's ribcage as he realized that if he removed it, he would swing into Zadok. Can you let me down?" Ira nodded to Zadok, who dropped the young man without warning. Jarvo staggered as his feet hit the ground, and then straightened with a grin. "I'll take you first to the green space," he said. "It's beautiful there." "Like you," he breathed. Behind him, Zadok rolled his eyes. "I'd love to see the green space," Ira agreed. "You go on ahead," she added to Zadok with a long look that she hoped communicated her plan. "I'll meet you there." "We won't be long, right?" she said to Jarvo. Jarvo nodded eagerly. "The green space is close by." Ira touched Zadok's arm. "I'll be all right." "She'll be safe with me," Jarvo said, and then paused. "What's your name again?" "The real question is, will you be safe with her?" Zadok muttered, but Jarvo did not appear to hear him as Ira told him her name. Ira took Jarvo's arm and pulled him in the direction of the green space. He stumbled and after righting himself took the lead. "Is he your boyfriend?" Jarvo asked once Zadok was out of earshot. "No," Ira answered truthfully. "He's a good friend and colleague." She paused a moment and then, "Tell me about the green space." "The green space fulfills the percentage for the interior peak section," he answered, slightly slurring the words. "The percentage?" Ira asked. "It's the law that all populated areas be a specific percent of green space," Jarvo said. "Our founders started that." "That seems like a good law," Ira said. "Serenissima Nuva is a beautiful world because of it. It would be a shame if that beauty was lost to war." "Yeah," Jarvo said, looking suddenly uncomfortable. Ira wondered at his reticence. Maybe his superior had chastised him for his speaking out of turn after they left the Turum. Ira pursued the matter anyway. The more intelligence she could get, the better. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked, pitching her voice to sound like she was asking for reassurance. "That there might be war again?" "I don't know," he said, suddenly evasive. "Hopefully it won't come to that," she said. He did not answer, but increased his speed, tugging her along behind him in his hurry. The green space was a circular park in the center of the section's merchant and residential lanes, which angled away from the park like spokes on a wheel. The layout required section residents to cross the park to get from home to work and back again, based on the philosophy that the exposure to nature would cleanse the mind. Ira noted skyrunners were ferrying people through the air above them, however. The park was vast, and it was a long walk for most residents, at least those who could not afford a skyrunner ride. Fortunately for Ira, Jarvo had brought her to an entrance to the green space near the hostel where the deserter hid. She was confident she could lure her would-be suitor to a secluded spot where she could render him unconscious and then swiftly rejoin Zadok. "Where should we go first?" Ira asked as they passed through a gate covered with a flowering vine. There's a spot I like with a view of the pond, Jarvo answered. It's this way. Ira let Jarvo pull her, murmuring about the lovely flowers and plantings, while surreptitiously looking for some place dark and tucked away. It was almost as if Jarvo had the same idea because when they arrived at the pond, he pulled her into a thicket of bushes that, except for the side facing the pond, completely hid them. Perfect. This is a delightful spot you've found for us, Ira husked, moving her body closer to him. A moment of distraction was all she needed. I know your outer forces, Jarvo said quietly. His demeanor completely changed, and he no longer appeared drunk. You're not making sense, Ira said, pulling him toward her. Come on, let's get more comfortable. He held her by the shoulders, which was fine with her, because it gave her unimpeded access to several vulnerable spots on his body. Listen to me. Serenissima Nuva's in trouble. There's been a lot of talk recently about how the Outer Union doesn't give us the recognition we deserve, how we would be better off if we joined the Inner Coalition. She narrowed her eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because you're outer forces. Don't deny it. You need to tell your superiors. I'm sure the Outer Union has people that already know. They don't know everything. There's this new group of refugees. They come from the Inner Coalition. They showed up here requesting asylum. We were happy to grant it and welcomed them. Then suddenly they were everywhere, and our administrators started talking about being dissatisfied with the Outer Union. People started listening, going to meetings, demanding change. But it's being kept out of public discourse and off of official channels. No one knows unless they're involved. Ira stared at him. She believed he was telling the truth, but that did not change the fact that she was under orders not to break cover. What do you expect the Outer Union to do? She asked in a soft voice. It was a question that got to the heart of his revelations while admitting nothing. Are you asking for help in a civil war? He shook his head. I'm part of a faction loyal to my world and the Outer Union. We'll fight our own battles. But this could be happening on other planets. The OU needs to know. He let go of her shoulders. Thanks for the walk, he said as he pushed back through the bushes. What if you're wrong? She called after him. Wrong about me. What if I'm not outer forces? His face paled and then colored again. Then I guess my life is in your hands, pretty merchant lady. He winked and was gone. Chapter 4. I am a citizen of the Outer Union, Merlina squawked, her voice echoing off the walls. You are violating my rights and the laws of the Outer Union. Release me this instant. She grabbed an edge of the cage with her beak and tried to rake the sides with her talons, to no avail. For the umpteenth time, she studied her surroundings, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. She snapped her beak in frustration when she could discover no way to get free. After her capture, the male and female mercenaries hurried her off the streets of the interior peak section, dodging populated areas, avoiding pedestrians, and hiding from skyrunners before entering what looked like an abandoned warehouse. There they removed her bindings, and before she could fight back, they shoved her into this horrible, conformable composite cage with barely enough room to stand. Then they waited, each sitting on either side of the cage. Merlina assumed they were expecting a smuggler transport to arrive to take her across the border to the Inner Coalition. That much seemed obvious. They could not very well carry a bound and gagged corvid into a passenger terminal without drawing unwanted attention. And if they left her unbound, she would ensure that they would die, or she would. You will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, Merlina croaked again. You will spend the rest of your lives in an Outer Union rehabilitation center. She peered at the woman. Perhaps they will order chemical rehabilitation for you. I hear it can be quite painful. The woman shifted as if she were uncomfortable. We shouldn't have removed the beak loop, she muttered. Makes it easier for it to breathe, the man grunted. The job is to deliver the bird alive. We can put up with the noise for a while. Demanding my rights is not noise, you budmash. You are farouche. Corvids are so mouthy, the woman complained. You mean beaky, the man sneered. They laughed at his weak attempt at cleverness. Argle bargle, Merlina said. All I hear is your borborygmus. Shut it, bird, the man barked. He brandished his whip. You'll be quiet, or I'll give you reason to croak. Merlina clicked her beak before closing it with a snap. No matter. She had other tools in her repertoire. She edged to the side of the cage closest to the woman, her talons barely making any noise as she moved. Turning her head slowly, she fixed an unblinking onyx eye on the female. Minutes passed, but Merlina remained frozen in that position. The woman blinked several times. Merlina could see the minute movements of the muscles around the woman's eyes as she fought to not look at their captive. She watched the rhythm of the woman's blinking, and each time the woman's eyes closed, Merlina changed the tilt of her head by a minuscule amount, just enough that her beak was in a slightly different location. An artery in her throat throbbed as the woman's pulse increased. Merlina slowly moved her beak closer toward the woman, one blink at a time. Stop it, the woman yelled as she threw herself away from the cage. What's the matter? The man asked in confusion. It's looking at me, the woman complained. It's looking at you. The man asked, his voice drifting into sarcasm. How much longer do we have to wait? Not long. They'll be here soon to take it off our hands. Good. I don't like this one. She sat down, crossing her arms and turning her back to the cage, but soon turned around again, finding Merlina still staring at her. Ah. Don't be such a whiner, the man growled. He took off his coat and threw it over the cage. There. Problem solved. Merlina slumped back in her now dim cave and reflected on what she had learned. The woman was weak, nervous, and afraid. The man was dismissive and impatient. She could most definitely use that. And these mercenaries were not taking her to be sold in the inner coalition. The buyers were coming to them. How unusual. Hours passed, 3.5 per local rotation, her seat's chronometer informed her. She had used the time to assess her situation with all the senses she could. The man stank of testosterone and unwashed clothes. The woman smelled of adrenaline and the lingering notes of a cheap perfume. They carried the lassos and snares of sapient mercenaries, but they lacked the sophistication, the cold ruthlessness Merlina had encountered before. These were not professional mercenaries, she concluded. Amateurs she could deal with. Eventually, they would have to open the cage. And all she needed was a moment. They're here, the man said at the same moment Merlina heard noises outside the warehouse. It's about time, the woman muttered. There was a gritty sound as someone crossed the open floor with crisp, long strides. You have a corvid? A voice asked. The feathers on the top of Merlina's head rose in surprise. It was a male, a man with the distinctive legato speech of someone from Glissande. Glissande was supposed to be a neutral world. How could one of its citizens be involved in sapient smuggling? We do, the man said, the smell of testosterone rising sharply. You have the payment? The gratitude of Lumel should be payment enough, the Glissandian said smoothly, making it sound like both advice and a reprimand. We are grateful, the woman stammered obsequiously. For his gratitude, she trailed off, either at a look from the man or after hearing how ridiculous she sounded. Merlina guessed it was both. Definitely amateurs. Gratitude doesn't buy food, the man said, but there was an almost imperceptible shake in his voice. Merlina could sense an increase in body temperature from both of them. They were afraid of the Glissandian, she realized. The Glissandian removed the coat from the cage and studied Merlina curiously. Where did you find it? It was alone, traveling with a man, the woman answered. A man who was treating it like an equal. She said the last words with loathing. It's almost impossible to find corvids that aren't traveling in packs, the man growled. Makes it hard to grab them. An unfortunate result of our work, the Glissandian nodded in sympathy. Your work? What work? Merlina asked, her voice heavy with derision. Who are you? His eyes narrowed and a slight flush rose on his face. He was not accustomed to defiance, though it could also have been cultural, she admitted to herself. Glissandians prided themselves on their manners. Her rudeness may have simply been an unpleasant surprise. "This one's different from the others," he said. "Not native to this planet?" "No," the man answered. "It came in on a merchant ship today." "I see." The Glissondian appeared to be having second thoughts. "Our payment?" the man insisted. He sensed his buyer's misgivings too. The Glissondian pressed his thumb to the man's wrist console. "Your payment as promised." The woman let out an audible sigh of relief. "Please let us know if you locate any more corvids," the Glissondian continued. "I will see you at the meeting." It was a confirmation, not a question. Yes, the woman said breathlessly, her chest heaving. "What meeting?" Merlina squawked. "Where are you taking me? I'm a citizen of the Outer Union. Release me at once." "This one's beaky," the man said with a grin at his own humor. "Not for long," the Glissondian said. He pulled an incapacitor from a pocket. Merlina hissed and rattled, waving her wings in agitation as she backed away, but the cage was too small for her to avoid him. The long fingers of the Glissondian reached in, jabbed the incapacitor into her breast, and she lost consciousness.